We've learned that the three tools of fiscal policy, changing government spending, changing taxes, and changing transfer payments, are all going to affect our aggregate demand curve for the country. However, there are a few policies that the government can pursue that target the long-run aggregate supply curve, and that's going to lead to a different economic outcome. So when fiscal policies are going to be targeting our long-run aggregate supply curve, we consider this to be supply-side fiscal policies, also known as Reaganomics, because the idea of supply-side fiscal policies was first administered by his administration. And the goal of supply-side fiscal policies is to promote growth, reduce unemployment, and stabilize prices. And they're all designed to shift our long-run aggregate supply curve over to the right. Remember that anytime we have a rightward shift of the long-run aggregate supply curve, it's also going to increase our Q star, our full employment level of GDP, which is going to be good for any country. And the reason why we like to see these sort of shifts of long-run aggregate supply curve outward is because they don't always require a trade-off between price levels and output. So we can actually get the best of both worlds with both of these outcomes right here anytime we have a rightward shift of the LRAS curve. However, as we've already noted as well, they do require a lot more time to work than demand-side policies. So anytime we try to target the LRAS curve, it typically takes years and years for these policies to develop and for us to actually see the end results of that. So what are the few things that the government can do in order to sort of induce the supply side fiscal policies? Take a look at these three examples. Number one, spending on infrastructure, education, and technology. And this goes without saying. As long as we have some type of productive government spending on these particular categories right here, that's going to induce a lot more economic growth and can shift our long-run aggregate supply curve over to the right. So things on infrastructure. So as long as we have well-built highways, well-built buildings, things that we like as consumers, things that will make our lives a lot easier, that will induce economic growth. Education, so improving the human capital, subsidizing higher level education, making sure that everyone has a minimum amount of education will be very, very good and can induce economic growth by making us more productive and more efficient. And then finally here, technology. Remember we said that technology is probably the primary factor or main driver of economic growth. So here, as long as we can find new technologies, new processes, new methodologies, new inventions, that will all induce economic growth and can shift our LRAS curve over to the right. Number two, reducing tax rates. We'll hit on this a little bit more in depth, but you might think that governments may want to always increase tax rates, so they're going to have more tax revenues and they can use that for their own benefit in order to spend on these sort of things that we see right here. But it really depends on where we are in terms of how high our tax rate is. So if we're in a certain range where reducing our tax rates will actually increase tax revenue, that can actually induce economic growth. And we're going to work with a model known as the Laffer curve to show why this is going to be the case. So here, reducing tax rates, we'll wait for the model with the Laffer curve to show why reducing tax rates can induce economic growth and shift our LRS curve over to the right. And then finally here, expanding investment and reducing regulations. So if the government can sort of incentivize a lot more investment by firms and corporations and reduce regulations, once again, this can lead to a lot more goods, a lot more services being put into the marketplace within the economy, and that can lead to higher potential or full employment GDP. And all of these factors have helped to reduce interest rates and inflation low for several decades, which is why President Ronald Reagan sort of wanted to induce these supply-side fiscal policies affecting the LRAS curve. So we want to go ahead and hit on point number three just a little bit more, and then we'll hit on point number two with the Laffer curve. So point number three, expanding investment and reducing regulations. How can investment be increased, or how can the government induce investment? They can take a look at these particular specific categories. Number one, investment tax credits. So the government can once again provide some type of investment tax credits to firms and corporations to undertake a particular sort of research project. So we see this quite a lot in the energy and sort of car manufacturing industries. So if they want to go ahead and say, hey, we want to investigate the impacts of pollution or investigate the impacts of maybe solar or sort of electric cars, then they can go ahead and give money to particular car corporations and say, hey, research this and we'll give you some type of tax break for that. Another thing that they can do is having more rapid depreciation schedules for plant and equipment, and this is going to be a little bit more of an accounting sort of terminology. So first in, first out, first in, last out, last in, last out. Those are all things you're going to see in your sort of accounting classes. But essentially here, depreciation, remember, it's going to reduce the value of a particular good. And if we allow for more rapid depreciation schedules, it's going to reduce the tax burden for this particular firm or corporation. And if they reduce their tax burden, that can encourage even more investment. So allowing firms to expense capital in a shorter period reduces the tax burden. So I'll give you an example of this using specific numbers. Suppose that a firm or corporation buys a piece of capital equipment for $1 million, and they only have, say, a 10% depreciation rate. So at the end of 1 year, their $1 million good now is only worth $900,000. And the firm or corporation is going to be paying taxes on a good that is worth $900,000. And that's going to be a very, very high tax burden. However, if we allow this firm or corporation to have a very fast depreciation schedule, so maybe a 50% depreciation schedule every single year, that $1 million good now is only worth $500,000 in the next year, and the firm is going to be paying a tax on that is going to be paying taxes on that good that is only valued at $500,000. So here, a $500,000 value good versus a $900,000 value good. Of course, the lower the value of the good, the lower the tax burden is. So this is what they mean by encouraging investment, because they're paying the lower taxes now with a more rapid depreciation schedule. That means they can use more money for investment. So let's go ahead and write down a little bit more of a sort of formal or a sort of simplified way of putting all this. We can go ahead and say that if a firm can depreciate its capital equipment, over a short period of time, we note that its taxes are cut now. So here, if they want to depreciate their capital equipment over a shorter amount of time, then its taxes are cut now. So essentially, once again, hitting onto the accounting convention, the faster the depreciation schedule, the less the tax burden is going to be. Other things the government can do to induce investment is to, number one and number three, repeal unnecessary regulation. Remember, firms, corporations, they do not like regulation. It increases the cost. So if the cost of operation are going to be lower with less regulation, they can encourage more investment that way. And then finally here, government grants for research. So the government themselves may actually finance a lot of research and sort of technology. So it's basically by giving firms and corporations money to research a particular sort of idea or particular policy that can induce even more investment as well. So all of these tie into the idea of the government providing ways in order to encourage investment, and that's going to lead to supply-side fiscal policy, shift our LRAS curve over to the right, and that can lead to economic growth. The next section is going to take a look at reducing tax rates and see exactly how the Laffer curve comes into play. So we're going to need to go ahead and build up the idea of the Laffer curve and show exactly how tax changes can induce economic growth by taking a look at the tax side, by taking a look at the supply fiscal policy side. So we'll go ahead and build that up next.